Talk about General Sir Patrick Sanders. He is the head of the army. He's making a major speech this morning. He's going to say we may need to mobilise the nation. In other words, the people may have to be called up to fight for king and country if we go to war with Russia. This is coming up this morning. Is that you? You going to sign up?
He's going to stress that the British public will be called to fight if the UK goes to war because the military is too small. It
makes me think, and it was one of my favourite programmes in the 1970s, Dad's Army. You remember Captain Mannering, the Home Guard at Wilmington-on-Sea? Look, they were great and fine men, but of course it would be women too now. Of course.
Well, yes, we forget that.
It would not just be your sons or your grandsons, but what do you make of it? Would you sign up for a war? I think it would be different if the country is under threat of invasion, like fascist Nazi Germany about to invade us. But the General is talking about potential war with Russia in years to come. Do you want your kids to go out to the Crimea and fight, or your grandchildren, or you?
But
would you do it?
We have a whole generation, particularly of teenagers, for whom their worst nightmare is not knowing the Wi-Fi code when they walk into a room. The idea that they would be able to go into this environment and physically fight for this country, that loyalty, I'm so sorry, we're in a very different place than we were in the 1930s. That loyalty towards king and country, etc., doesn't exist. I'm so sorry, it doesn't exist.
And it's also the fact he's making this speech is a reflection on the fact we've allowed the armed forces to decline and wither on the vine so badly. The army's down to 72,000. We have more people in the army when we were fighting the Crimean War. Extraordinary. Maybe we should bring back the horses.
But also, I mean, and it will be interesting to hear what's his name again, the head of the army?
Sir Patrick Sanders. General Sir Patrick Sanders.
Well, it's been interesting to know what he says this morning about this, because I have been led to believe over the last several decades that war now is something that happens remotely. It happens between huge planes in the sky that shoot each other, and it's not going to be human beings with guns. Like, what? So,
well, we're going to ask you what you think. So we're doing a poll on Twitter. Would you fight for your country? Would you want your grandson, your granddaughter, your child, your daughter? You can go to the poll on our Twitter page at GB News. Yes or no? It's a very simple question. Would you or wouldn't you?
Yeah, and then, yes, give us your reasons why. Yeah. No, give us your reasons why. We will look at it.
And how many people do you think would do it? We're going to talk to the former Head of Counterterrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman, who's well known to this programme. Good morning to you, Chip. This is an extraordinary intervention by the Head of the Army. He's making the speech later this morning. Do we need lots of men and women on the ground fighting war? As Bev said, don't we fight wars now with drones and missiles?
Well, that's the big debate which has been out there between the nature of war and the character of war, and has the character of war changed? Now, if you look at the nature of war, we always say, for example, there's a Clausewitzian trinity, and that is you can only campaign successfully if the army or armed forces, the government and the people are aligned. If one of those blocks is out of sync, then you can't campaign. That's, for example, why the Americans had to get out of Vietnam. So having the debate about a draft proposal for whatever it might be, conscription, is really designed to generate discussion and perhaps new and better ideas. In terms of the character of war, the person I look to for this is Mark Milley, who's just the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in America. In 2017, he talked about 5 myths that we need to let go. The first one, wars might be short, they might not be, and of course that preceded the invasion of Ukraine. The second one, armies fight wars. They don't. Nations fight wars. The third one, armies are easy to create. They aren't. The fourth one, you can win wars from afar just by dropping ordnance. You can't. You need boots on the ground eventually, and that requires something between mass. It is true, as General Cavoli, the current SACEUR in Europe, said, that precision can beat mass, but it takes time. So really, there are 2 concepts, I think, that have been missing from most defence reviews. The first one is regeneration, how we actually make sure that the armed forces we have are fully manned, fully stocked, available and sustainable. And the second one, which again, this is designed to sort of generate discussion, is reconstitution. How do you expand both your armed forces and the industrial base to support the type of war that he's reflecting upon?
And also, Chip, How do you create a generation of kids who are effectively pretty narcissistic, actually, these days? We've had this culture, haven't we, that we think, you know, you've got to love yourself first. There's this sort of mindset amongst the younger generation, all their selfies on social media. To tell those youngsters, you've got to go and put all of everything you've ever wanted to do, all your future, your ambition to one side. You've got to go and fight for this country. Most of them probably can't even name the Prime Minister. This is why you need a national identity, isn't it, for times of crisis?
Yeah, there is something to be said about that. And there's been a lot of discussion, of course, about Gen Z, the disconnected generation, which has an 8-second filter. If it's not interested in something, it moves on. And they're the generation more likely to suffer stress and burnout. They're easily offended and they lack motivation and productivity. Now, again, one of the things which is missing is if we deemed, or people deemed, that it was vital interest, then I'm sure people would sign up. But we've been pretty bad at defining what are the vital interests, the major interests, the minor interests of the UK. And for example, I would argue that one of the vital interests is, of course, the free flow of trade, which is why the sort of Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb and the Houthi action is key to us, because that increases inflation, disrupts trades around the world and makes life really disastrous for all. And we're just not good at doing that. The other tension with Patrick Sanders is also with the Chief of Defence Staff, where the Chief of Defence Staff talks about expeditionary rather than continental power, and that our operational advantage comes from not from mass, but from disproportionate effect, i.e. those things you sort of mentioned in the start, really, Bev, in terms of, you know, either drones or cyber warfare and all that stuff. There is this tension between this sort of exotica of the future warfare, which only really the Americans can do with their R&D and scale, and the reality that war remains visceral, people get killed, and it's bloody and messy.
Close Society find it, I mean, he's not saying this, Chip, but what would your view be about the idea of bringing back national service, even if it was perhaps for 1 year?
Well, I think if you just concentrate on personnel, you're not really getting a capability. A capability is the sum of training, equipment, personnel, logistics, infrastructure. All those things give you a capability. Just to have conscription as in an armed force doesn't buy you any capability. Right. If you're talking about national service as a way of enabling civic citizenship and producing a good citizen who might know about these things I've just been alluding to, then that might be a good thing. This sense of responsibility which transcends the individual.
OK, brilliant. Thank you, Chip.
Really
Major General
really
Chip Chapman.
National service, I mean, a lot of people talk about it.
National service. Oh, I'm a big fan of national service. I think, yes, because that would then mean that these kids may not be so preoccupied by the Wi-Fi code.
They have it in Israel?
Yeah, I think I didn't used to think that, but I think I would be a fan of that now.